We are back with another episode of the Sky Society podcast. And today I'm so excited to be chatting with Tange. She is currently leading product marketing at Topi. Welcome, Aya.
Thanks, Natalie. So great to be chatting with you.
So excited to be chatting with you too. And Aya is coming to us all the way from London. Is that correct?
That is right.
That was the last thing I was definitely expecting. So really excited to jump into your journey, how you ended up in London and your journey starting off at Microsoft, going to Apple, and then making the switch from big tech into the startup world. So we have a lot to jump into today. But before we get into all of that, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I'll start with that. But hello, everyone. My name is Aya, and I am currently starting a new job. I am on week 2, working in a startup called Topi. I am leading their product marketing efforts there. It's a really exciting time because they are going into the hardware as a service space. So I've always been in the software subscription world, but now I'm going into hardware subscriptions. So they're building a platform that enables all of that for B2Bs. So it's a really new challenge for me, and I can talk a little bit more about it later. But yeah, I'm based in London. The company is headquartered in Berlin, so I do a lot of travel between Berlin and London. And I'm originally from Japan. You don't hear it in my accent, but I was born and raised in Tokyo. My mother is American, so got the accent from her, and then moved to the US and now London. So a little all over the place.
Yes, you're quite the world traveler.
A lot of miles, that's for sure.
Yeah. How old were you when you moved to the US?
I was 18, so moved for college.
Wow. So you spent most of your life in Japan.
Yeah, born and raised. I went to an international school out there. And then I always knew I was going to go to the US for college. So applied to US schools only, and then ended up getting into Harvard. And I studied economics, sociology, and psychology there. So all about people.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about that. Why was that the avenue that you decided you want to go into?
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually thought I was going to go in and study economics, and I went to my first economics class at Harvard, and you can imagine everyone was way smarter than me, and I realized, wait a second, do I really want to do this? What do I really love about economics? What is it? And I realized it's actually the people and the decisions that people are making and how they're working together, and looking at how businesses work together. And I heard about this. I went to my advisor and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having a career crisis. I thought I was going to study economics, but now I don't really know what to do. And he said to me, have you heard of sociology? And I was like, no, what's that? And there's this piece in sociology called economic sociology. And that's really studying how organizations work together and how people work together within organizations. And that's really what got me interested. I took a couple classes and I was like, yeah, this is what I want to study. And then of course there's a big psychology piece to that. So I ended up minoring in psychology as well. And my biggest piece was really learning how people made decisions, their small daily decisions. And that's what essentially got me into marketing, because that's what we do in marketing, is figure out how to convince someone to buy your product. So that was kind of my segue into marketing.
Amazing. I always love the journeys where we think we're going to do one thing and we end up doing something completely different. And I feel like so much of that is, I know when we go to school, we always like economics, finance, we think of like the big pillars of like what good degrees are. And so I like sociology was never anything, like I actually didn't even know what it was until you just told me what it was. I knew it was something like people related, but I think it's like very, very important to open your eyes up to different paths like that. And I also think it helps when you get to bring a more diverse perspective to teams instead of just having like the same degree that everybody else has.
Totally. And I actually really appreciated that Harvard is a liberal arts school, so you can't major in business, you can't major in marketing. So it makes you take a step back and think a little bit more of learning, to your point, learning different, a diverse set of skills, and go, okay, how do I apply that to something that's a little more, tactical, like marketing. But I think that definitely helped me in the long run.
I can only imagine at Harvard, was it like as competitive as people make it out to be?
It's definitely competitive, but I have to say the people there are really the most amazing. That's the most amazing piece about Harvard. The different people I met, the stories I heard, just all of that was what made my experience versus the textbook, work that you're doing. Of course, the professors were great as well, but I really do think it was my classmates that made all the difference for me. And yeah, there were times where it got a little competitive, but for the most part, we worked together to get through it all.
You had also mentioned decision making there for a second. I like that area of aesthetic. I think it's like I've always had an interest similar to you, like in psychology. Do you have any advice when it comes to making decisions on how we as people can make better decisions?
Oof, that's a tough one. It's funny, I worked at a research lab at Harvard Business School where we actually studied how people made decisions, like even the small decisions of, am I going to have a bag of chips or am I going to have a banana? And it was really all about the context that you were put in. And so when I have to make a decision, I'm always thinking about like, what pieces of information do I have in front of me? Like, what is the context? And trying to make a rational decision, if possible. But I think it's just giving yourself a beat and going, okay, what feels right and what makes sense for me in that moment based on what information I have.
Yeah, I think those inputs, knowing what those inputs are is so important. And I think one thing that as humans we tend to do a lot is make a lot of assumptions before we get to our final decision. And a lot of those assumptions end up, if you actually take a step back of like, I'm trying to think of like a good example I can use, but even if it's like, which job like should I take, right? Like if you have two jobs in front of you and like, am I leaning towards one because of like societal perception or whatever, like what are these assumptions that I'm making, and like actually kind of like going backwards. So I really love that you said that.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up the job the job dilemma, because a lot of people, who are, it's a good position to be on when you have two jobs to choose from, but it's one of those moments where you do have to also remember it's not life or death. Like, you have two great options in front of you and you're going to learn from both of them, and whatever you choose is going to be great. Like that's that's the piece that we always forget, because we're always like, oh my gosh, which one should I pick? Which one's going to be better? And yeah. I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of cut ourselves some slack there.
Yes, I feel like all of those moves seem very, very large. And then, yeah, sometimes just getting some perspective of like, okay, this isn't the end all be all. I know even like for me within what I do, like I'm making decisions all the time. And sometimes there's certain decisions. And I find that the reason that they're so hard to make is because I am just like placing so much pressure, so much unnecessary pressure. And that's what's actually making the decision hard. Yep. And it's unnecessary, but it's like it's hard to do that sometimes because they feel so big in the moment.
Yep, totally. I was just there.
We'll get there. Okay, so you got your degree in sociology from Harvard, and it looks like the first major role you kind of got out of college was at Microsoft as a business leader. Is that correct?
That's right. So so maybe I'll take a step back. I actually during my junior year of college, I had an internship at Apple, doing corporate communications, and I was really lucky because I worked in a team that actually was connected to Tim Cook at the time, and really looked at Apple from a strategic level versus, iPhone or iPad or Mac. And it gave me a really cool view of Apple. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to work at Apple for the rest of my life. This is going to be my life. But in reality, at the time, they weren't hiring their non-technical interns at the end of the summer, which I didn't know.
Whoa.
And so it was a bit of a blow. And my manager at the time, who I am still friends with, he said to me, he said, look, Aya, you can go work for a PR agency, because I was working in corporate communications. You can go work for a PR agency for a couple of years and then come back to Apple, or you want to be in tech. So go look for a tech job. And that was the advice that I got. And so I was obviously in tears at the end of the summer saying, why? I want to work for Apple. What does this mean? And I had to start senior year looking for another job. And Microsoft has an amazing program, which I have to thank really for my start of my career, called the ACE program. And it's a 2-year marketing program. It's run out of Chris Capicella, who's the CMO of Microsoft. And he does a 2-year program that allows recent grads to actually, try different functions of marketing at Microsoft. And so I started in the business planning world for Bing and Cortana. What's really cool is Bing is getting sexy again.
I know, with the whole chat GPT, like thing, I would hear it all about Bing.
which is so funny, because when I was working on it, sadly, it wasn't that cool. So I got made fun of quite a bit back in 2016 when I was working on Bing. But it's really fun to see the team now. It's just exciting to see all the news that's coming out, and I'm really excited for them. But I was doing business planning for Bing, so you can imagine what that was like back in the day. And then I did that for a year, learned a lot of like, how do we make money? How do we think about making money? Like, how do we think about a long-term plan? And I was really focused on revenue. Then my second year, which is the second rotation of the program, I decided, I want to get really close to the customer. How do I get close to actually thinking about our customers and potentially talking to them? So I jumped over to Office 365, to the subscription space, and worked in integrated marketing, working on our communications to our customers. So because it's a subscription, we always have to make sure we're talking to them, making sure at the end of the year they're going to renew because they're seeing value in Office 365. And so that was the team that I ended up on, was how do we talk to the user in the right way at the right time? And so we did a lot of experimenting, which was awesome, and got a lot of learnings of how to not piss people off with too many communications. So that was my second year at Microsoft. Then my third year, I was technically out of the program, and that's what got me into product marketing. At the time, I didn't really know what product marketing was. I was like, okay, sure. It sounds like you're closer to the product, maybe, because is that what product marketing means? And I joined this new product called Microsoft Teams, which also no one really knew what it was. No one really believed in it, because we had Skype for Business. So everyone was going, wait a second, why are you building this thing called Microsoft Teams when you have this really successful product called Skype for Business, and everyone's using it and everyone's loving it? And so it was really my first taste of a little bit of a startup world, because it was this small team that was trying to get this new product out the door for Microsoft. And so that's really where my product marketing career truly began.
Amazing. I mean, what a place for it to start, for you getting to work on such core products within Microsoft. I mean, you got to see, Teams blew up basically, what, a year later after you left?
So it was pretty insane, because I was on the Teams team. We have to call it the Teams team during COVID.
So you were there when it okay.
So I was there when COVID hit. And that was a crazy the first 24 hours were just total mayhem. And then it was really the entire month of March was what's going on. And then we really then got into this new normal. I have to say, on the product marketing side, our entire value proposition, our product roadmap completely changed when COVID hit, because it now became this tool that was solely for remote work. Like we had people calling us saying, oh my gosh, my business is now completely virtual and remote. I need teams to help me connect and communicate and collaborate with the rest of my organization. Help. And so we were like, okay, we need to really rethink our positioning here and think about features that can help. So all the meeting features that we need when we're working from home, and then also how we explain our product and how we teach people how to use our product completely changed over COVID. And I was a part of that team who kind of made that change and helped teams grow.
How exciting to be a part of it during that time. I mean, I know, at least for me, I had never even heard of Microsoft Teams. I personally have never used it, but I've done lots of meetings with other teams that use Microsoft Teams.
Yeah.
And it is just, it's so, I mean, now I feel like at this point you either have Microsoft Teams or Slack. Like everybody has one or the other. And so it's like, that's really, really cool that you got to be there during that time. And it's kind of like if you were working at Zoom, like during COVID. I feel like there's like certain products that like COVID hit and it's just like, you never could have planned for that growth or like expected that.
Yeah, it was in terms of learnings, I think it was really eye-opening because you realized how much the surroundings mattered, right? So it's like you really have to listen to your customers. You really have to think about like, what do they need? What do they want? Make sure that feedback loop is getting back to the engineering team and saying, we've got to build these features or else they're not going to use our product. It was a really just interesting time to be there. And I learned a lot, and I'm still using those learnings in my job today. But I got to do some really interesting demos. I did one with Satya during COVID, and it was, like week 3 of COVID. And I was so scared I was going to give COVID, this thing called COVID, to Satya. And it was one of my biggest fears. And I was like locked up in my apartment for 48 hours before I actually saw him. But it was scary. It was a scary time.
So it was in person. It wasn't online.
It was in person. We actually filmed a demo. We were trying to show the world that we were here for them and that we were building features that meant that they could work from home. And he wanted to do it in person, and we made it work somehow. We at that time, we didn't have vaccines, we didn't have masks. Like it was all very new. It was like 3 weeks into the pandemic. And but we did stay 6 feet apart. So if you actually go back and watch the video, we are oddly far away from each other when we're talking. And I remember telling myself like not to breathe too hard so that my particles weren't going to get onto it. So that was part of my practice when I was doing my rehearsals.
What a cool experience that you got. Yeah, COVID definitely just brought out just the most interesting times in all of us. But I could see like it looks like you kind of like naturally fell into this product management role, and we'll get into the next career moves that you made, but they remained in product marketing. Can you tell me a little bit about why do you think product marketing, like what about it do you really love or are you drawn to about it?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting role because it's this intersection between the product team, the marketing, the sales team. We kind of sit right in the middle, and we work together with all these teams to bring the product, to market. Like that's really what we're doing. And you have to influence. Like there's not a lot that we can do on our own, but we work in partnership with a lot of other teams. And I think what I personally love about product marketing is we get to think about the customer and we get to be the voice of the customer when we're building the product. And for me, I always like putting myself in the customer's shoes, going through the flows and going, would I understand that as a customer? Would that work for me? And I genuinely pretend to be the customer in meetings, like day-to-day meetings. And so I'm that person that's like, yeah, but I don't think that would work for me. Like, I don't think that would work for a business or a customer, or a, consumer. And I think that's a really interesting role to play as you build a product. And we sometimes forget to do that because we're so heads down. We've got to go. We're thinking only about the internal processes, and we need to take that breath and pause and say, are we actually building something that a customer would want? So that's the role I like to play.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun one. Definitely. I always like talking about product marketing because I feel like you're never really taught about that in school. I don't even know if there's even like paths for that in colleges or anything like that. But it's so, especially with how big tech is now, like basically for any tech company, there's going to be a product marketing role. And yeah, definitely the rest of your career kind of leaned that way. And you went back to Apple next. So the first time didn't stick. What again for round 2, doing product marketing for Apple. So tell me a little bit about your career switch there.
Yeah. So Apple actually ended up reaching out to me during COVID, and they were building out their iCloud product marketing team at the time. And I had been at Microsoft for, almost 5 years. And I decided, maybe I should think about another company. I love product marketing. And so I wanted to stay in the function, but, changing tech companies isn't a bad idea. Get some new experiences. And so I decided, I interviewed and went through the process and got the job. And so I decided to take the role. And it was, again, an interesting time to take a new role because it was, again, during COVID. So I essentially closed my Surface laptop and I opened a Mac.
I actually never even thought about that. Like totally switching tech, like completely. Did you even have an iPhone at Microsoft? Or was that?
I had an iPhone, so that made it easier. But it was kind of silly because I was sitting at home and I just like shut a Microsoft computer and opened up an Apple one. And a little sad. I wish I was actually in person at that.
Yeah, I mean, you remember that so vividly.
Yeah, no, it was a crazy time, and onboarding to Apple was also tough remote, because I think Apple has such a way of doing things that you have to live and breathe that process and culture, and I definitely struggled in the first couple of months, but then as we were able to see each other in person a little bit more, we got our vaccinations, and we're able to go into the office, and that also really helped, and I got to meet my team in person, which was great. I didn't realize how much teamwork was built on just relationships that you build outside of the day-to-day meetings that you have. And it was really easy for me at Microsoft because I knew everyone, before we went into lockdown. Apple, it was building relationships via this little, camera on your screen is pretty tough. And so I don't know if I would actually start a new job well, hopefully we're not in lockdown again, but I wouldn't start a new job, fully remote. I don't think.
It's interesting that you say that because there's such a draw to remote work and the flexibility that it brings. Like very, very attractive draw. And I work with a lot of women who are looking for their first job out of college, right? And some of them are like, of course I want to work remote, like work from home all day, wear PJs, like not have to deal with traffic, like that is the dream. But I think for those that never had the opportunity to work in office, you definitely do miss out on a lot. And, everyone works differently on what's best for them. But I made so many friends at my work too, just by like being in the break room, right? Or like by like going and getting snacks, and by just like running into people, or just having that human connection, I think is so important. And, now I do work like fully remote, but I definitely really do miss that in-person experience.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think a lot of people struggle with the, oh, only want a fully remote job because I can travel, all the time. In reality, you're probably not traveling all that much. And you're probably sitting at home, to your point, in your PJs at a desk. And it gets lonely. My job is hybrid. And so I go into a co-working space now, once or twice a week, and then I'm at home. And I definitely realize I'm a people person and I want to be with people. And I think for people who are coming out of, for their first job, going in is so important. You learn so much, and you are going to miss out. So again, everyone has their own preferences, but I would urge people to go into the office if they can, because you'll just gain so much more by doing that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you say that. I'm a big proponent. If I were to go back into working, I think I really like the hybrid, because you kind of get that flexibility of, okay, if I'm having a really busy time, okay, I can, but if I want to be around, you kind of get that choice and that flexibility. But yeah, I definitely think if you haven't experienced an in-person office, that it's really important to do that. Or if your company does, I know some companies do make it optional, try to go in and actually take that option, even if there is traffic. It's definitely, those relationships that you build of just by accidentally running into people, or just by, being energized. I mean, I'm an introvert, but I will still be energized by working around other people.
Yeah, no, it's the nonverbal cues. It's all the little things that you pick up on, and that's how you learn. And I think if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be as successful as I am now. And yeah, there's a new way of working, and I think we all have to figure out where we best fit into that new system.
Yeah, absolutely. So you worked at two really, really big tech companies, Microsoft and Apple. And so now you made a huge switch into so going from big tech into a startup, into this hardware, this whole new thing. So tell me about, or actually wait, before I jump into that, we missed one thing. You moved to London while you were in Apple. So wait, before I go into your next job, tell me a little bit about your move to London. Yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah, well, it's all connected. So I can give you the backstory. Perfect. So when I took the job at Apple, my partner was actually applying to business school. And he was applying to a bunch of different schools, some in the US, some outside of the US. And as it came time to decide which one he was going to go to, it was a big topic of conversation, and he decided to go to one in France. So he went to INSEAD Business School, and it's in this really cute small town called Fontainebleau in France. So it's about 40 minutes outside of Paris. So you're living like Beauty and the Beast style little town.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, it is absolutely, there's this chateau, and I mean, it's magical. And he decided to go there, and it was a 1-year program. And I was going to stay in California, obviously working at Apple. And at the time it was obviously COVID. And so I was able to do a little bit of travel as much as I could during COVID. And I was back and forth, France, California. And as time, came up to him graduating, we had to decide, okay, what's next? Does he come back to California, or is there another move? Do we stay in Europe? And so we decided, let's keep the adventure going and let's try something new and go live somewhere else. And as I mentioned, I grew up in Tokyo, and so going Tokyo, California, I was like, okay, I haven't done Europe yet. So that, feels right. So we decided to pick a place. We picked London. It was a good place.
Why London?
Yeah, it was a big topic of conversation, but we decided it was good for both of our careers. It was a big international city that had opportunities in the tech world. He was going into management consulting, so we had a good balance of job opportunities. And then, of course, we also had a lot of friends here. So it was like, yeah, this is kind of a no-brainer. Let's do it. But this was actually my first time that I had to make a decision in my career that was for like a personal decision versus a career decision. And that was really hard. Putting my personal self first was something I hadn't done. I was like head down, work, grind, like make sure you're doing everything for your career. And this was the moment where I was like, wait a second, I think I want to do this for myself. And I went to my manager at Apple and I said, hey, I'm actually going to make a personal move and I'm going to live in London in the next couple of months. And I don't know what that means for my job here, but I'm telling you this because I want you to be a part of my move. And he was really, really supportive. And I was very grateful for a manager and a management team that allowed me to make this move. And I actually worked remotely for Apple for a couple months in the time being because I was finishing some projects. And then I decided I wanted to not only move countries, I wanted to change my job too completely, which
because moving countries wasn't enough.
Yeah, moving countries wasn't enough. So I decided to put that on my plate as well. And so I had always known in the back of my head I wanted to go into the startup world. And so I think this was like my right time to go look into it. And I was very lucky and I was connected to a couple of VCs here in London, who then made some introductions to their portfolio companies. And I ended up meeting Charlotte and Estelle, who are now my bosses. They have co-founded together Topi, the company I'm at. And they were actually both at Harvard Business School. So we had a kind of a connection there. And then Charlotte worked at Apple. So she also knew the way I worked at Apple and the style of working at Apple. And we started with just some conversations. I thought they were just conversations. They turned into a job interview, and then it was come join the team. So a really crazy experience. And yeah, now here I am.
Amazing. Okay, before we jump into what you're doing now at Topi, I want to like hit on a few things that you just mentioned over there. So you mentioned that you for the first time you were prioritizing a personal decision over career. And what I want to note in that decision and that journey that you made is that when you went to your boss, you didn't say like, hey, I'm thinking about making a move. Like, could this possibly work? You went to him and you said, I am doing this. Like, I'm not asking for your permission or for you to like tell me that it's okay. And so I love that you made that decision before figuring out if it was okay with work. Like you genuinely put that first. And I think that's really special. And I think that's really, really scary to do. And I definitely think a lot of people can relate to just working so hard and that career like move comes first, but obviously that there are other things in life that matter a lot. And, you know, your partner definitely matters to you a lot too. And so, yeah, I just wanted to like highlight that because I think that was like a very important little like nuance to that step you took.
Yeah. And I'll double down on that because it was scary and it took me months to get to that point where I walked into that room and said, I'm moving to London. Like it took 7 months, I would say. Like it took a lot of courage for me to get to that point. So it's not easy. So anyone who is having that, internal debate, it's very normal and it's daunting and I get it. But I did everything I could to make this move possible. So like I needed a visa to live here. I did not rely on Apple to give me that visa. I found another way to get a visa because it was called a global talent visa for tech. And I could apply for it on my own. And I filled out an application that was longer than my college application. And but it allowed me to live and work in the UK for the next 3 years without being sponsored. And so there were definitely pieces that I researched on my own to figure out how do I get myself to London? Like, how do I remove the blockers to get myself to London, because that's my goal. And yeah, it definitely was a tough decision, but once you decide, I think you just got to go for it. And it was worth it. Like, I learned so much in the past 6 months, more than I would have ever learned staying in the US in the same job that I was in.
Yes, I love that you say that too. It was just like, it was on your own. Like, you didn't have to rely on your job to make it happen. Like, you found a way to get there by yourself. I'm also curious. So this idea is, at least to me, like, romanticized, of like moving to another country. Like, it sounds so cool. And I think a lot of people in their heads, like, will probably be like, that is really, really cool. But obviously a lot of us aren't doing it, me including, because it also is equally scary. Do you have anything to share there on like what really gave you the courage or the confidence to just pick up and move to a whole nother country? Because that is, again, it's also like scary, and even without the career piece.
Yeah, it's funny. We joke about it all the time, because we're like, man, we had no idea what we were thinking. Like, there are so many things that we just wish we had known, but we didn't know. And things like getting a bank account, or getting a cell phone plan in a new country that they don't even think, you don't have credit. Like, there's no credit. Your credit score is crap here because they don't know who you are. Like, there are all these things that you just like don't think about. And you take for granted when you're living in the same place for a long time. But it wasn't easy. And so there are reality checks as you like make this, what we romanticize, you just pick up and leave. It's like, no, there was actually a lot of planning involved. And so I would do as much planning as you can beforehand, and really think through like what can you plan for, and there are things you cannot plan for. I also have to say it wasn't cheap. So you have to also be ready to, pay for things that you just, again, didn't even imagine, think of. And you just have to be ready for that. And so there is the reality, hit when you move. But again, if you have your goals set, you can go do it. Like, it's possible. We're doing it now. So have faith and pick the place you want to go and make it happen.
Beautiful. So it can happen. It's not a little reality check, but definitely still possible. And yeah, look at, I've been to London once before, and I loved it. I felt like it's also, to me, it was like the most similar to the United States out of like most of the countries in Europe. I remember like, I did it when I was studying abroad, and I was studying abroad in Spain, and Spain is like, I couldn't even find like peanut butter sometimes. Like, it was just, I remember being really hard. And then I remember getting to London, and there's like a Whole Foods, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's like something close to America. Yeah. There's like some ties, but yeah, that's absolutely amazing that you got to make that move, and then took you to this new role at Topi. So can you tell me a little bit about what your role there looks like, leading product marketing?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm week 2, so I wish I could say it's joining a startup. Like, I knew it was going to be different, but I joke around. The smallest company I ever worked at was 140,000 people, and now I've dropped to 40, right? So I am making a massive move from big tech to startup world. But I have to say, as I was deciding on a company and thinking about what type of company I want to work for, like, culture was really important to me, and the people were really important to me, because I knew that with 40 people, you have to be working with every single one of them. You're going to know every single one of them. And I wanted to make sure that it was the right fit, and, the right type of culture. And so, I was really lucky. I ended up joining an offsite that Topi had before I joined, to really feel and experience the culture of the people, and that's what really got me sold. And so I think for me that was really important. Product marketing didn't exist at Topi 2 weeks ago, so I am it.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I am now trying to figure out, how do you create a product marketing, function and, group at a new startup. And so it's a very different challenge. I'm actually doing like an intro session as to what product marketing is to the company next week in Berlin, at another offsite that we have. And that's the name of the game. Like it's a whole new world, and it's really exciting because I get to craft it and I get to build it from the ground up. And it's, for me, I think, a big proving moment where, hopefully I can do it. But it's a new challenge where I'm not guaranteed, the role or the day-to-day job. It's like I have to make it for myself. And Charlotte and Estelle, my founders, have also made that clear. They're like, yep, you've got to build it, you've got to craft it. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity for myself, and hopefully beneficial for Topi in the long run as we build our product.
Yes, that's entirely different. Before at those two large companies, you had a huge, support system. And I know you did work on like new products within those companies, but definitely like I also have a good amount of experience in the startup world, and it is such a big difference when you're figuring things out on your own. But I also think you're right in that it's the best way to learn. And the whole thing with Sky Society and our accelerator is all like learn by doing. That's the best way to learn. And so I'm like a very big believer that you like doing some, like having to learn something on your own without like being told this is the way to do it. You just learn it. Yep. Infinitely. Like you just get so much more out of it. It's such a better challenge.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been asking all my teammates, like, what is the biggest piece of advice you can give me as I join Topi, join a startup, and they're like, just do something. Like, it doesn't matter, just do something. I'm like, wow, that is just so crazy. Like, I don't need to ask for approval. Like, how does this work? Like, and what are the processes? I'm just not used to it. And I think it's a really exciting and overwhelming at the same time, I have to say. I'm currently in the overwhelmed phase, but how do you make a difference? What do you pick up, and what can you do to bring the product forward? Like, how do you keep the trains running? And I think I love the fact that it's not about like what your role is. It's just help the team move forward. And I genuinely am having fun with that piece.
Yeah. I think your situation too, like you're building this product marketing function, but I think other people may relate if you are the only person that does something at your company, right? Like if you are a single person department or you are tasked with bringing something new, I think a lot of those same fears come around it. But I also think the good news is that there's no standard for you to be compared to. So like what you said, like if you're just doing something, you're doing more than that was already done, right? Like you're already ahead of the game. And I think that can eliminate some of the fear of just don't have an analysis paralysis. Like actually,
thank you, Natalie. I needed that because I was, at the end of every day, you're like, man, what did I do? Did I help anyone? So I'm trying to cut myself some slack. It's the same thing of like moving to a new country and like getting adjusted, and starting a new job's the same. You have to give yourself that adjustment time, even though yes, the startup world is much faster. I still have to listen and make sure I'm understanding everything before I can really make a difference. So I think that's just the phase that I'm currently in.
An exciting one too. Lots to learn, lots to grow from. And we are wrapping up here. Time flew by so fast chatting with you. I have one last question before I let you go. Do you have any last piece of advice that you want to share with women in marketing that maybe want to have a career path or a career journey like yours?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have to say, I think where I found success is really putting in the time and effort in the first couple of years and really just focusing and saying, yep, I'm going to put my time and effort into my job, and that's going to be my priority. Of course, that's not everyone can do that, but that was something that I prioritized. And then that's what essentially allowed me to make more of a personal move later on in my career. And I think that has then opened a bunch of new doors that I didn't think even, were there. And I have to say, just being open to things that come your way, say yes to them, and just go for it. I think that's kind of my motto right now, is say yes and you'll figure it out. Because things work out. Don't worry, it's gonna work out.
They do. They always find a way. I always like to remind myself that they always find a way working out, even if it's a new situation. It definitely does in the long run. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Aya, for coming on the Sky Society podcast and sharing your career journey. It has been so much fun chatting with you.
Thank you, Natalie. It's been a pleasure.